Welcome to episode 8 of my training diaries, documenting my training throughout the 2022 season. This last week of training started like any other, but unfortunately by midweek it became apparent that I had gotten sick. I was actually feeling a little off the week prior. This was in lead up to my big 60K training run that I did last weekend. But I attributed it at the time from being just cumulative fatigue from all of my training. I now know that I've likely been fighting the virus for the past couple of weeks, but was largely asymptomatic until I developed some cold symptoms around Wednesday afternoon of this past week, like a stuffy nose. The good news is that my symptoms were very mild, and after just a few days, I was left with just a bit of a runny nose here, but no cough or fever. But for now, my training has taken a back seat. So in the meantime, I thought I'd use this opportunity to talk about something that is really an inevitability for any runner, and can be the hardest thing for new runners to grapple with, and that is how to deal with setbacks. Now, the first thing that I would say is that a training plan really is just a starting point. For me, it's what gives my training shape and purpose. And it's as much about what I don't do as what I do, because as we've talked about in the past, those rest days and those down weeks in our training are important as well. But it's rare that everything goes exactly according to plan. Life happens, and this can include work or personal commitments getting in the way of a long run or maybe a key workout. And more often than we'd like, can also include illness or injury. In fact, I would say that dealing with injury is simply part of being an athlete. We ask a lot of our bodies, and most of us, anyway, do our best to avoid injury by doing all of the things, like foam rolling and massage, and even taking that extra day off when we think our body needs it. But injury can still creep up on us when we least expect it. It can be a result of overuse, and this might be our body trying to tell us something. In my case, this has often stemmed from some kind of underlying mobility issue. But I've always come back from these injuries a stronger and smarter runner, having learned more about how my body works and how to avoid a similar issue in the future. Now, not every setback is something that we're going to come back stronger from. I realize that. Many people do develop chronic injuries or illnesses that require major adjustments and compromises. So I don't mean to minimize these kinds of challenges that others might face. But there are bound to be many setbacks that will eventually seem like distant memories. And these are the ones that I want to focus on here. For example, I tore my hamstring at the end of my 2020 season. I had been out running on the road doing a bit of a tempo workout when I suddenly felt a pain in my hamstring. So I immediately stopped running and tried to walk it off, but it only got worse. So I bailed out on my run and fortunately had access to a nearby car with a car sharing program that I'm part of. I took a few days completely off and it felt fine. So with this being the beginning of winter, I went out and did a run up Mount Seymour over here in the snow with my trail crampons. At one point, I lost my footing and I slipped, and I did a big lunge and felt a snap. The first time I hurt my hamstring was likely very minor, just a strain. But it was the second time where I really did the damage and tore it. And of course, then I had to make my way back down to the car, doing further damage along the way. There was likely some kind of underlying muscle imbalance that led to that first incident. I hadn't been taking my warm-ups and mobility work very seriously, for one. But I think my bigger mistake was not having then taken the first incident more seriously. I should have paid better attention to my body and headed to physiotherapy for treatment before it got any worse. What followed were weeks of treatment with my physiotherapist while I worked on beginning to strengthen my hamstring again. She worked with me on a run-walk program where I'd run just a couple of minutes at a time until I could build back up to 10-minute intervals at a really easy pace. I then started working with a personal trainer in the gym twice a week to not only strengthen my hamstring, but to also begin addressing any other muscle imbalances that I likely had. As I talked about in my video about my goals for 2022, where I also summarized my 2021 season, I ended up going on to run over 3,000 kilometers in 2021 and having an excellent season free of further injury. I haven't had a problem with my hamstring since, and I can definitely say that I'm stronger now than I was before this incident. And most importantly, I continue to be fully committed to strength training, as I'm sure you all know by now, because it's something that I talk about so often. So this short-term setback, while it honestly felt like the end of the world to me at the time, I believe has set me up for success in the long run. A good friend of mine started running a couple of years ago, and I warned him about all of this, partly in an attempt to get him to take things like foam rolling and stretching seriously early on in his running career. Now, he actually made it a couple of years without an issue, but recently did have to take a break from running because of an overuse injury. He said he'd remembered what I'd said and finally realized what I meant, and was trying to take it all in stride. The good news is that he's back at it like it never happened, and now he's got a good physio to work with in the future. So here's how I deal with setbacks in my own training. The first thing is not to panic. In the case of injury, wait until you've gotten a diagnosis before assuming the worst. You may still have plenty of time to get back up to speed, especially if it's still early in a season. And hey, sometimes if it's closer to your race, it just means being forced to start your taper a little bit earlier than you'd planned. And worst case, you're going to show up to your race being nice and rested. We then need to adjust our plan. I'll be connecting with my coach Eric to adjust my own training plan here to compensate for some of the fitness I'll have lost and to ensure that I can get back on track safely. The worst thing you can try to do after taking time off is to try to cram it all in, because there's a chance that this will lead to injury or at least just leave you feeling overtrained and tired come race day. And this is where I think having a coach is really important to help keep things in perspective as we adjust our plans. There's a reason why coaches will schedule regular check-ins with their athletes. Adapting like this is just part of the process. And this process may involve reframing your goals into something more achievable. You can't show up at a race undertrained and expect the same outcome. So instead of setting a personal best, maybe you aim to just finish and have a good time. Or maybe you need to drop down to a lower distance. Worst case though, you might need to completely skip that upcoming race and begin to target something new a few months down the road. And finally, I try to find a lesson in these setbacks, at least when it comes to overuse injuries. As I said before, I try to see an injury as a chance to learn more about my body, to figure out what went wrong and how I can stay healthy longer term. I think the main lesson that I've learned is that I need to think first and foremost of my running, not just in terms of seasons, but as a running career. When I have a major setback that forces me to drop out of a race, I do allow myself a period of mourning. But I then try to refocus on the bigger picture and on the ultimate goal, which for me is about maintaining a long-term active lifestyle. I plan on being a competitive runner for decades to come. I really am just getting started. And I recognize that not every season is going to go exactly as planned. So I hope that was helpful to at least some of you, and let me know in the comments if you are yourself dealing with a setback. I feel like as runners, we've collectively faced close to 2 years of setbacks and disappointments when it comes to races. So most of us have probably learned to take these kind of things in stride. But for many of us, that might make any further setbacks feel that much worse, since we're finally back to traveling and racing, and many of us are trying to make up for lost time. I'm hopeful that this is just a small speed bump for me in my training, given how mild my symptoms were. We'll have to see what kind of effects, though, this has on my fitness through my final block of training in May. Otherwise, I may need to take my own advice and maybe reframe my own goals for my upcoming race. So I'll of course have an update on how things are going when I talk to you all next week.